if I had just passed this by, I would always wonder, what if I had bought that place, And at that time, I was just thinking, I just love this and I really just want to do it and I'll figure it out. And you know what? If it doesn't work out, then I'll figure that out.
Welcome to the Career Flipper Podcast. I'm Jenny Dempsey, your host, a furniture flipper, and someone who knows just how tangled and emotional career changes can be. This show started during one of those "what now" moments. I got laid off from my job in customer experience, and after sending out hundreds of applications and getting hundreds of rejections back, I decided to get scrappy. I taught myself how to restore junky furniture. You can check out my furniture flips on Instagram and TikTok under San Diego Furniture Flipper if you're curious. But as I went from the startup tech world to being covered in paint and sawdust in the garage, I started to wonder, how the heck do other people get through career changes like this? Am I the only crazy one out here? So I started sliding into other people's DMs who I saw were talking about this, and I just started asking them questions. And let me tell you, the stories I heard were full of honesty, resilience, and hope. Now, every week, I talk to everyday people who flip their careers, sometimes by choice, sometimes because life gave them a big old push. Their journeys are messy, inspiring, and might just give you that little nudge that you need right now, because I sure know they gave me the nudge all the time. So, because there are new episodes every week, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss an episode. And if you got a takeaway from an episode or something resonates, just leave a review and share what you think. Okay, now I got a serious question for you. Have you ever sat at your desk working? Maybe it's a busy day. You just can't focus. You're staring out the window and you're thinking, what if I just bought a chateau in the south of France? Packed up the burnout, the to-do list, the Zoom fatigue, and ran away to a place with cobblestone streets, freshly baked baguettes, and sheep for neighbors. Well, meet Trish Jasinski. Trish spent decades building a career she truly loved in corporate marketing. But during the pandemic, stuck in a very tiny Paris apartment, she started joking with friends that chateaux in the countryside were actually cheaper than her shoebox of a flat. So, just for fun, with absolutely zero intention of buying, she went chateau shopping. And then it happened. She stepped into Château de Gère, a 14th century stone fortress tucked into the Vallée des Osseux in the Béarn region of southwest France. And her heart said, "This is it." There was no plan, no 5-year forecast, just a full-hearted yes. She bought it. Now, Trish lives in a quiet village where sheep outnumber people, and she's transformed that ancient chateau into a retreat and event space filled with soul, stories, delicious food, and second chances. And she's using everything she learned from her years in corporate to build something entirely on her own. In this episode, we'll talk about listening to your gut, especially when it makes zero sense, using old skills in wildly new ways, and creating a life that's slower, sweeter, and deeply yours. Let's get into the episode with Trish now. What is this? Because usually you see these DIY shows with, houses, just regular houses, and here we are, something different. And while I was watching this, there was this one woman on here who was building a bridge. And I know that probably sounds so random. You'd have to see it. But the thing about this, it was a bridge at a chateau that she purchased. And I'm not going to give away the details of the full story because you'll share this here soon, Trish. Everyone's going to meet you here soon. But what stood apart was that you didn't know how to build this bridge over the stream that was on the property of the chateau that you are now living in and maintaining. And your creativity and resourcefulness to put it together using reclaimed wood and kind of watching, I think you even mentioned you watched some videos or learned how to read blogs to figure out how to do it. And you made it work. And then at the end, with your friend, you're sitting there drinking a glass of wine and you're cheersing on this bridge that you made. And I was like, oh my gosh. When you also shared your story about how you got to the chateau, I was like, I have to just see if I can send a message in and have you on. So everyone, enough of me rambling. Trish, welcome to the Career Flipper.
Thanks, Jenny. It's great to be here. And I love the way you told that story in the introduction and how you just randomly, popped along on this television show. And here we are. I think that's great.
And here we are. And yes, and thank you for letting me just like randomly slide into your DMs and be like, hey, I have this little show. Your story sounds amazing. But Trish, tell everybody who you are, where you are, and what you're doing now. And I think everyone will kind of get an idea of why I was so just gravitating towards you and your story and your journey.
Okay, sure. My name is Trish Jasinski, and I'm originally from a small town in Connecticut. And long story short, I had an opportunity in 2008 to move to France, to Paris. I actually created the opportunity, and I moved over here and fast forward to COVID, I bought a 14th century chateau in the Southwest Pyrenees, and now I host small group retreats, getaways, and events here at the chateau.
Wow. Yeah. That is a pivot right there. Like many pivots, not only the career part, but like moving to a different country. There's so many things there. And I love that you said you created that too. You created this opportunity to go to a different country, put yourself in a different culture. And now you're in a place where it sounds like you never saw yourself ever being there, but here you are. But how did this all start, Trish? Where did it begin? How did you even create that opportunity? What type of work were you doing? Just, yeah, share it all.
Okay, okay. I was working for an international company doing marketing, and I was based out of Boston, which I absolutely love the city of Boston, loved living there. And there were some organizational changes that were happening at that time and some relocations that were happening. My department was going to be moved to a different part of the country. And I just wasn't excited about where we were going in terms of that location. And so I was thinking, I've been doing more international travel for work. I was totally bitten by the travel bug. I absolutely loved it. And I was thinking, maybe this is an opportunity for an international assignment. And I worked with a bunch of colleagues in Boston who, were from different countries. So, this type of company, it provides those types of opportunities to work in different locations. And around the same time, one of my colleagues out of our Singapore office had resigned, and I was thinking, okay, you know what? I'm just going to send an email to the head of that Asia Pacific operation and and see, do you need any help in marketing over there? Because, this guy had resigned. And I was surprised that the head of that operation was receptive to the idea. And he's like, yes, I'm going to be in town in a few weeks. Let's meet and let's have a chat about it. I was like, wow, I didn't expect it, to get kind of response. And so I was thinking, well, Singapore is absolutely lovely, but it's also a very long way from home. And so I was thinking, well, if it was this easy to send an email to the head of the Asia Pacific operation, maybe the European operation that was just outside of Paris. And so it was the same thing. I'd only met that person a couple of times. I didn't think he would even remember me. But, how difficult, what's the worst that can happen in sending an email? If he ignored it, then fine. But what if, and sure enough, he had done an international assignment when he was younger, saw the value in it, and he was receptive to it. And before you knew it, I was moving to Paris. So that's how I created that opportunity. And
Yeah.
it was great. I mean, you never know what can happen if you don't ask, right?
Right. Yeah. The power of asking. You just sent an email. Like, how many of us will not do that because we're so worried about, oh, what are they going to think? Or is this the right thing? And all these things. But like you said, what's the worst that could happen? They could just ignore it or never reply or say no. Like, and then I don't know, you figure it out from there, but you did it. So you sent these emails, you created this opportunity, and now you're living in Paris.
Exactly, exactly. And Paris, what an amazing experience that was. I mean, it's just such a wonderful city. And I lived there from 2008 right up until COVID. I did have an opportunity within that time frame. Actually, it was just a few years after I had moved to Paris. Again, more organizational changes. And I had an opportunity to go to London. So I was thinking, you know what? Why not? And I got to London, and as much as I loved traveling to London, living there was a bit different. And my heart was in France. And so I was like, I've tried this, and I want to be in France. So I actually ended up finding another job to move back to France, and I've been here ever since. I've since gotten my French nationality, and I've switched jobs a couple of times, and really just built a life here.
Wow. And so throughout this whole path, when you're kind of bouncing around through the roles and going to different places or different companies, did you like your job? Was it something that you enjoyed doing? Were you in an office? Were you working remote? Like, what was the kind of, I guess, day to day like at these roles that you had, even when you were working abroad?
I really liked my job. I mean, I worked in marketing. It was a large international company, so you got to, interact with people from all over the world. And in large enterprises like that, a lot of times you have an opportunity to kind of, get your hands in a lot of different areas. So I had the amazing opportunity to just, experience so many different aspects of marketing, from, communications to digital and content marketing to events, PR, all these different things I was able to, get experience in doing. So I really did like my job, and I loved the travel that came along with that. And so it was great. And I was in the office most days, a couple days, I would work remote from time to time. But before COVID, it wasn't that often. So, but then COVID hit and everything changed.
Yeah.
So, so during COVID, I was in my tiny Paris apartment, which I absolutely loved. But the last few years I had been in Paris, I think it's, the older I get, the less tolerance I have for the noise of a city.
Yeah.
I grew up in a small town, and, I'd been thinking, maybe I want to move out to the suburbs or something, or maybe I want to just move to a quieter place. Even, maybe I can work remotely. So I was starting to explore opportunities like that. And then COVID hit, and being confined to a small apartment
Yeah.
kind of, put me over the edge in terms of, you know what? I'm done with city life, and I put my apartment on the market, and listed it for a price that I didn't expect to get, but right time, right place, I guess, um and it sold within a few weeks. And I was like, okay, well, I planned on just going to the suburbs at that point, and a friend of mine planted this idea of a chateau. She said, you can buy a chateau for the price you sold your apartment. And I'm thinking, what? Because you
Yeah.
have these like large, ginormous castles and stuff, I never imagined that it was, accessible for somebody like me, Um, so of course I was curious, and I started to just look online, and, well, what kind of chateau can you buy for the price of a Parisian apartment? Um, so, and I was surprised. I mean, France has over 40,000 chateaux, so it's not like, there's
Yeah.
few and far between, they come in all shapes and sizes. Um, So around the same time, my 50th birthday was approaching. And, for my 40th, I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. So I needed to do a big adventure for my 50th.
Yes.
And with COVID and confinement and limited travel, my options, there weren't that many options for a big adventure. So I was kind of feeling, all right, well, 50, the big milestone is going to come and go without, much excitement. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. And one night I'm having virtual cocktails with a friend of mine. And we, she was training as a coach. And so she's like, well, let me practice on you. And a few glasses of wine later, and the end of the conversation, I was going chateau shopping in the southwest of France for my birthday.
Gosh. I love that. So you're out there chateau shopping and you're like, okay, let's see what happens. Like, so what did happen when you were out
Yeah.
there looking around?
Yeah, and I was half serious about it. I mean, it it took me 10 months to find my Parisian apartment. Like, this one little chateau shop trip, I made a few appointments, I didn't really expect to find anything. But sure enough, the third one I looked at, it was love at first sight. And it was just one of those moments that I just didn't think. Like, I made the decision completely with my heart and absolutely no thinking went behind it. I'm like, I'm gonna just make an offer because I'm going to regret it if I don't. And we were all working, remotely at the time. And so I was thinking, well, let's just see what happens, and if it doesn't work out, fine, I'll figure something else out.
Mm.
So so I made an offer a few hours later, and before you know it, I'm moving down, and build. I'm I'm going to say that again. So I made an offer a few hours later, and before you know it, I'm a chatelaine, which is the French word for a chateau owner. It's just the craziest thing.
Oh, so you just move in and like what kind of happens next? Because this decision was made from your heart and now there's like real paperwork and actual things and this new type of ownership that's a lot bigger than a tiny Parisian apartment. So like how, and then also working remote, like was there, this is probably a silly question, but was there internet there? Like, I mean, how did all of the kind of like details work out? And then, yeah, how did this all come together?
Well, it was a process, and I, actually, when I first sold my apartment and I bought this, I was thinking, I'm still employed in Paris. We're working remotely, and so I did rent an apartment in the suburbs. And my plan was, well, I'll rent out the chateau because the previous owner had told me that, he would rent it because it's in a location where there's just a ton of stuff to do, all the mountain sports that you can imagine, lots of culture and history. And, if you're a foodie, tons of great stuff to eat and wine tasting, all this other stuff. So, I was like, it doesn't sound like it's going to be too difficult to rent it out. So, it'll be a vacation home and I'll rent it when I'm not using it. Well, fate, stepped in again, and the person at the bank processing my loan put it down as a primary residence. And I was like, okay, well, if I have to be there for 8 months out of the year, we're working remotely.
Hmm.
So why don't I just move there? And then if and when I have to come back to Paris, to go back to the office, I'll figure it out, so I gave up my rental in the suburbs, and then I moved down here, and it it was not what I expected. First of all, I'd only been here for about 20 minutes making an offer. I didn't. I mean, I didn't know anything about the area. I couldn't remember. Is it in a village? Is it isolated? Like there was
Yeah.
so little thought that went into it. It sounds ridiculous that I actually did this, um, but yeah, I was surprised being in a little village where families have lived here for generations, how welcoming my neighbors were. My bad French, they're very patient, they're very generous, they're very friendly. I mean, it was just a real shock, a pleasant surprise, though. And everybody in the community, honestly, it's amazing how wonderful the people are in this area. And as far as, living in a chateau, I mean, this place, it's older than the United States. It was built in 1388. I mean,
Wow.
isn't that crazy to think about?
That's
Yeah.
crazy. And the history of it that you shared, it's like fascinating. Can you tell a little bit about that too?
Yeah, yeah. King Henry IV used it as his hunting lodge. It's just really funny.
Incredible.
Yeah, I
Oh.
named my cat after his first wife, Marguerite, so that she can hunt any critters that kind of want to, try to come and be my roommate. No, actually, it's not too bad, but yeah. So, and a long history of nobility. The King Henry, and a feudal lord, Jean de Gère, who lived here. I don't know a ton about the history. I'm still learning.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, some of the aspects of this is just really interesting. So yeah, I moved in, and I've spent the last 4.5 years making it my home. The previous owner did a lot of work, so it was perfectly habitable. But you kind of have your own taste, your own decorating style, and certain things have to be refreshed. And so I've done a lot of work with that. And then the one thing I didn't anticipate was the yard work. Oh my gosh,
It's on how big of a property? How big is that?
It's about 5 acres.
Okay.
Yeah. But I only have to maintain, I would say, about maybe 2 of those, because I have a big field that my neighbor's sheep graze on, and so they maintain that field, which is wonderful. And so I get to watch the sheep playing out in the yard all day, and then my neighbors give me cheese, which is a wonderful thing.
I mean, that's a trade right there. Yeah. So you move here on a whim, listening to your heart. You'd been there for 20 minutes, so to say. And then by, some random twist of fate, the paperwork mentions this as your primary residence. And you kind of have to continue with that. And you just, you're no longer in the city. You're no longer even in the suburbs. You're now in this village that you are, you're learning about. You're not sure, like, who's here and how they're going to respond. And then you're finding like a new community and how kind people are, even when there's maybe a little bit of a language barrier. And what happened then to the corporate job that you had been working? Because I know, initially you're like, I'm going to do this and work remote. And then if I have to go back in, depending on how things go with COVID and everything. So what kind of happened with that transition?
Well, I had intended to continue working my corporate job until a round of layoffs were announced, and I was impacted. And so before you know it, and this was actually, it's a year ago next week that I left the corporate world. And again, I think it's another twist of fate that, I was thinking, I'm going to become an entrepreneur for the first time in my life, leave the corporate world, the security of the corporate world, which is really scary to do. But, I had so many friends and family that had come to visit here and just absolutely fell in love with the area. And they're like, you have a real opportunity if you ever did something with this place in terms of a business. So, the wheels had been turning for a little bit, if I'm honest. And then when these layoffs happened, I'm like, it's now or never. I'm going to go do this and see what happens. And so I started the business a year ago, and it's still, slow ramping up. But it's great to be able to welcome people from, different parts of the world and, different backgrounds. And, it's great to be able to just welcome people here. And, I love everything about this area, and so I get really excited about, "Oh, well, you can go and do this, and, oh, you've gotta taste this, and, you can do the wine tasting here, and my neighbor's cheese is the best in the valley," and, so I get really excited about helping people to, really, experience the culture and everything there is to do in this and see in this beautiful part of the world.
That's incredible. It's absolutely incredible to be able to also to go into it with such open eyes and to be able to let it all absorb for yourself, but then now to open that for others to experience. And I think, Trish, one of the things that stands out and that I hear from a lot of other career flippers, which may resonate with you, is this idea of what I think in corporate lingo is called transferable skills, but also what I like to call is kind of this golden thread that when we start something new, we're actually not really starting something new because we have all of these skills and experiences from our past that we can use and repurpose. And so, you had worked in marketing for so many years, as well as working with an international company and your own personal experiences of travel. And then when you got laid off a year ago, to start this kind of entrepreneurial journey, how do you feel that the skills that you have built up for so much from the past are playing into what you're doing now? Are there things that are kind of standing out as more or less that you can really lean on? Of course, there's so many new things to learn, but just curious, how are you finding that to work? Because diving into entrepreneurship is such a different is the word adventure or beast? I don't know. Those words come to mind because it's
It's
so
both.
different. Yeah. Yeah. So how are you kind of finding that at this point?
You're absolutely right about the transferable skills. And I just am so grateful for all of the experience that I did have in working for those large international companies. Because, like I said before, you get an opportunity to get exposed to so many different things, So I knew how to write a business plan, I knew how to develop a marketing strategy. I ran a lot of events, and, so I know what it takes and how you do your run of show to make sure that you've got, your color coded spreadsheet with all the details of what needs to be done when to make sure everything runs smoothly. All of these things I had done before and, it is very much transferable. So I feel like I was really well positioned in the journey that I'm taking now just because of all of that experience that I had before. And of course there's surprises, but I think that the most difficult thing for me right now is navigating the French system because it's complicated. And I'll be honest, I'm not fluent in French. I can speak it well enough to manage, day to day. But some of this stuff is a bit complicated and it does get confusing. So that is very difficult. And the other thing, if I'm honest, that I find very, very frustrating is, I'm in marketing. I know how to run a campaign. I know, I've got my target audience and I, know how to craft messaging and all this other stuff. And, I've built these amazing retreats that I think are amazing and I'm struggling to fill them, So and I think that's just, it takes time. It takes time to, build up an awareness and also, get the word out and, rise above the noise because there's a lot of people that do this all over the world. So, it does take a little bit of time, but, of course I want it to happen overnight.
Of course, yeah. Yeah. No, that all makes so much sense. And I think that emphasis on that it takes time is so crucial because I know a lot of people listening are like, I want to do something different and I want to do it now. And in order to kind of build things up, sometimes it can take a while, but taking those small steps towards that and giving yourself permission to be patient, which kind of sounds nuts, but I had to do that for myself. I mean, I still do, even as I'm building things up and trying to figure it out. And I think that that's so important. And it sounds like you're really giving yourself that, even when it's like, this is difficult. And I can't even imagine trying to navigate something like paperwork and permits and all this type of stuff in a different language. that sounds, yeah, that's tricky. And so, but you're doing it. You're doing it, the small steps, and you're making it happen. And I just think that that is so admirable and just so inspiring, Trish. Like, it's so inspiring that, you had this, you didn't set out to buy this, and you really leaned into your heart. And I think touching on that, when we make decisions, a lot of the times it's like, use logic, use facts, like really think about it. But when we make decisions from the heart, it's such a different story. And of course, all the other stuff, the logic and fact and all the day-to-day stuff will be there even when we make the decisions from the heart. And so just kind of curious, when you look back on, when you were touring and you were just looking at this place and you really fell in love with it, what, I guess if you can't even put it into words, what were kind of some of the things going through your mind at that time that your heart was saying that really led you to lean into this, even if it might seem kind of crazy and it was kind of a joke with your friends? Like, what was going through your mind at that point?
It was just one of those things that I feel that if if I had just passed this by, I would always wonder, what if I had bought that place, And at that time, I was just thinking, I just love this and I really just want to do it and I'll figure it out. And you know what? If it doesn't work out, then I'll figure that out, I'll sell it, So I usually, again, I didn't put a lot of thought into this because it was very much driven with my heart, but I did, have the thought of, you know what? I'll do this. I'll rent it out. If it works, great. And if not, I'll sell it. So I usually try to think about what's the worst case scenario, and what do you do in that case? And you know what? It's not catastrophic, so why not? Because imagine what could happen, right?
Right, right. I always love to say, what's the best that could happen? Like,
Love
looking
that.
at it from both sides. Like, there's a worse side, but there's also a really good side of all of these things that could happen. And yeah, I just think that's so interesting because I know a lot of like people listening really have these things that their hearts might be leaning towards, but it's so easy to just be like, no, it's not realistic, or that's a funny idea, or people might think I'm crazy, or whatever it is, and we don't do it. But kind of leaning into what you said, that it would be something you would always think about. And I think a lot of us, when we go through life as we get older, we start to think back on those things of like, oh, well, if I would have done that, like it hasn't left my mind and I didn't do it, or whatever it is. And I think that's just such an important part of this whole career flipper thing that I am kicking off and talking to people, because it's not just about careers that we're changing. Like, it's lives, like it's our entire life, decisions that we make, things that we say yes to, things that we say no to, and how we spend this precious time that we have. And you are now in a place where you are bringing these experiences to people's lives, and you are enhancing their lives. And to pull out the credit card and book a trip to go to France isn't always the easiest thing either, but now people are coming to stay with you and to have these experiences. And just on a personal note, I want you to share a little bit more about, the types of events that you do, and like, the sheep next door and you get the cheese. Like, and I think I remember you maybe mentioning there are more sheep in the village than people, and like, and all of the outdoor, wonderful like opportunities of sports and hiking and all kinds of things. Can you talk a little bit about your place, your chateau, what you offer, and then the surrounding area? I just want everyone to really like let that sink in.
Sure, absolutely. And let me start by saying, yes, there are more sheep than people in my village. My village has about 200 people, and my neighbors whose sheep graze on my field, they alone have 400 sheep. So
Wow.
yeah, literally
Yeah.
twice the sheep relative to the people. But well, really, the experience that I'm trying to offer people is really about discovering what I call this little slice of paradise, because it really I mean, a lot of people, they know France, they know Paris, they know the Alps, they know Provence, and those places are wonderful. This place isn't really all that well known relative to those others. And so it's a bit off the beaten path. And I think that's kind of what makes it so special because it's still very authentic. It's we often, if you're going down the road a certain time of year, certain time of day, you'll get caught in what we call a Béarnais traffic jam because I'm in the Béarn region, and it's basically when the farmers are herding their sheep from one field to the next, and you just have to sit there and wait.
Oh my gosh.
Anyway,
Yes.
sorry, that's a bit of a
I
side
love
tangent.
it. I love
But,
it.
that's life here. It's not all commercially built up, but there's just a lot to see and do and appreciate. I mean, the scenery. I mean, you just got these stunning mountain views in every direction, which I absolutely love. And uh, I actually had a group of women here this past weekend, one who was celebrating her 60th birthday, and she wanted to do a girls' weekend to celebrate. And so, I spoke with her ahead of time and, just kind of shared a bunch of different ideas of things that we could do or that she and her friends could do. And so, she just kind of narrowed it down. And then I went and created the experience for them. So, they arrived, I picked them up at the train station or at their a hotel up in the city, and they came down. And first thing was, we had lunch, and then they went out for one of the many charming villages to do a walk through that. It was actually a 3-village walk, so they just kind of started exploring some of the villages, and then the next day we went to the weekly outdoor market where I know a lot of the vendors. So you go around and you chat to everybody, and there's all kinds of in addition to the fruits and veggies and stuff that people sell. There's a woman that sells soaps and another that sells, a different aperitif, type of wine type of thing. So, a lot of different, unique vendors. And then they rented e-bikes and they toured the entire valley on e-bikes. There's bike paths and these, small country roads, and they just had the best time doing that and were able to see so much. And then they went to a local spa to relax after all their bike riding. And then we went to a local outdoor concert that evening. And we also did, I had somebody that I know in the area who comes to your house and does wine tastings. And so we did that, the next night. And I'm trying to remember. Oh, and they also took a ride on the highest narrow gauge train in Europe, which offers spectacular views of, the surrounding mountains and stuff. So, that's just an idea, an example of one of, the experiences that I create here. So some of them are customized like that. Others I create. For example, I did an immersive French course. There's a woman from my hiking group who is a French professor, and I asked her if she wanted to get together and do an immersive week of French instruction. And so she would do a few hours of class in the morning, and then we would go and do an activity that allowed them to interact with some of the locals. So we went and met with a beekeeper and saw how should they make honey. We had a local chef come and do a cooking class. We, did a visit to a vineyard and of course some wine tasting. So, these are just some different examples of some of the things that I'm offering here.
I love that. And it's so curated to your guests and to what people will want. I mean, that girls, I'm like, count me in, sign me up for all that. That sounds amazing. Like, I mean, you're in such a unique spot where you can offer this. And with your very event focused mindset, you're able to create that. And then they stay with you, right? At the chateau, like you have different rooms. Is that right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. The chateau, I mean, let's be clear. It's not a palace. It's not one of these big, large castles that people often think about as chateau. As like I said, they come in all sizes, shapes, and sizes. And mine is actually what they call a chateau fort, which is kind of like a fortress. So it's small, it's compact. I only have 4 guest rooms, and and so, it's a very much like a family style living. It's not, a West Wing where you can, have
Yeah.
like a few bedrooms down there. And,
Yeah.
it's a big open living space and then the guest rooms. And then, I've got a pool outside and, the grounds that you can,
Yeah.
go relax in the hammock and, look at the mountains. So
Oh my gosh. And just geography wise, I apologize. How far is it from Paris? Like, do you get there by train? Is there, how does that work?
There's a city called Pau, P-A-U, that is about 35 minutes north of me. So they have direct flights from Paris into Pau or direct trains from Paris into Pau or Bordeaux or Toulouse. So it's situated in the southwest at the foot of the Pyrenees. And actually, I'm only about 45 minutes from the border of Spain. So it's that far south
Okay.
and
Wow.
about 2 hours from the coast.
Incredible. Oh my gosh. Like I am dreaming of a career flipper retreat at some point there. Like, I mean,
You
it would
know,
just be
you just let me know when you're ready.
yeah, I'll
Come
be like, let's
visit.
curate this. Let's make this happen. If anyone listening right now wants to do that, let's make this happen. Because I have no idea. Event planning is not my forte at all, but I would love that. But I think, I mean, honestly, like Trish, like there's so many key things that are standing out for me here. You had you curated your own corporate job to be exactly what you wanted to move to a different country by asking. You put yourself out there and you asked. And then when you had this idea come up from a friend and you're like, oh, this is funny, you still went out and looked. Like, you didn't just keep it in your mind, you still went out and looked. And then you made a decision with your heart, something that I think a lot of us wish we could do more of, but we feel so scared because we don't think that that's really allowed. And you did it. And then there's still the day-to-day things, there's still the hard things that you're navigating, and then a layoff, and then trying to reevaluate what to do and picking up the entrepreneurial flag and being like, all right, we're going in. And I think, Trish, for anyone listening right now who might be sitting at their desk and whether or not they like their job, they may feel like they want to change, or maybe they just got laid off, or, they're also watching Chateau DIY and wishing they could do this. Like, who knows? Like, what piece of advice or multiple pieces of advice would you have for someone who might be feeling scared of making a change like this because there's so many unknowns, but they really, really want to make it happen? What is something that you could share with them to guide them on their journey?
I think it's as simple as what we've already what I said and what you said, which is you just think about what's the worst that can happen and you plan for that, and what's the best that could happen and you aspire to that. I think that's what it's all about, and again, things don't always work out. My business, it may not work out, but you know what? I tried it, and if I have to go get another job, so be it, but I've done this and I'm having a great time right now, and I'm not going to regret it if it doesn't work out. I hope it does, but if it doesn't, that's fine, So I think it's really about, you have to be. I mean, some of my decisions were, very spontaneous. It's funny. It takes me longer to make a decision about what restaurant to go to than it did to buy a chateau, so I'm very
Yeah.
inconsistent in that sort of sense. I can overanalyze things, but I think like we do often overanalyze and what if, but I think you have to look at the what ifs both in the negative and the positive sense. And so I think that's my advice is, what's the worst, what's the best that can happen?
It's great. That's great advice that we really factor in all of the things, but not overthink it. Like, just finding it to the point where it's like, if we try it, we can always either return to what we had or, sell it, whatever it is. And just know that at the end of the day, it's something that we're not going to be thinking about for the rest of our lives, wondering what would have happened if we had done that. Trish, thank you so much for being on here and talking with me about this. I think what you're doing is amazing and so inspiring. And I know, like, because of like I'm going to be there one day and I will be walking on those grounds and looking at those beautiful mountains and, watching the sheep. I can't wait. At some point it's going to happen. I'm putting it out there. But Trish, tell everyone where they can find you, how they can come book an event with you, how they can stay, all of the things. How can they connect?
Sure. Well, my website is probably a great place to start, which is chateaudegère.com. I think we can probably provide the link to that.
Yeah.
And I'm also on Facebook and Instagram as well, where I post some of the many things that you can see, do, and taste here in the Vallée d'Osso, as well as, some of my DIY projects. So, you're welcome to follow me on that.
I love it. Well, I hope everyone does. And thank you so much again, Trish. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Jenny, and I look forward to your visit.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Career Flipper Podcast. To connect with Trish, check out the links in the show notes. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review, because doing so helps other career flippers find the show. And let's be real, figuring out this career stuff is a lot easier when you know you're not the only one winging it. If you have your own career flip story to share, I would love to hear it. Visit thecareerflipper.com to submit your story for a future episode. What I love most about hosting this podcast is the chance that these stories might be the nudge someone needs to take that first step toward whatever it is they want to change. That first step is so scary, for sure, but it's also where the magic begins. So just know that every single tiny step you're taking, it's worth it. Keep going, my friend. What's the best that could happen?